Hey, welcome to A Little Better. My name's Daniel. I'll be your host today on the podcast. Drew and I talk all about what our biggest thrill-seeking moment is, what faith is, how those two things work together, what faith is not, and so much more on today's episode. Remember, our goal on the podcast is to know Jesus better and by the power of his Spirit, do better, so together we can be a little better. Well, hey, welcome to this week of A Little Better, episode number 55. We've never done that before, but I just know that it's number 55, so it's fun. Right, week 5 of, right, is it week 5? It's week 5. Week 5 of A Church That. You talked all this weekend about crazy faith, Drew. And so I thought, what better way without Brad here with us to talk about a little thrill seeking. So what is the thing, or would you consider yourself a thrill seeker, first of all?
No,
Okay.
my dad was an insurance agent. I feel like that's
My mom sold insurance too, or she still does. And so, So what is, in light of that, the biggest, adrenaline rush, thrill seeking that you've done? And it doesn't have to be like jumping out of an airplane, but just,
I mean, I like roller coasters, so I wouldn't say I'm like thrill, like not seeking. I think I have a limit. So I would actually consider skydiving. So maybe I'm a little bit of a thrill seeker. I don't know. I'm very conservative. I'd have to work into it. But this isn't like, I don't know if people would consider this thrill seeking, but it was very thrill seeking for me. On our honeymoon, Ashley and I, we went to Jamaica and we went scuba diving. Nice. And I think what was thrilling is like you have these Jamaican guys who don't seem like they know much about scuba diving teaching you to scuba dive. And then you're underwater, 20 feet, breathing. And like, what if something goes wrong?
Right.
So it was awesome. But
yeah. And for clarity's sake, you said you would consider skydiving.
Yes.
You didn't say you've been skydiving though.
Right. No, I would. Okay. I would have to be talked into it, but I could see myself at some point in my life maybe doing it.
Yeah. For me, I would definitely consider skydiving. I would go skydiving. I don't think I would go bungee jumping. Haven't done either one, but probably for me the biggest thrill-seeking thing I've done. I grew up like cliff jumping into the lake. Like there's cliffs on all these lakes in Arkansas that you jump, and you could be jumping like 20, 30, and upwards of feet into the water. That's always fun and thrill-seeking. But I've also jumped off of like the top of a waterfall in like Guatemala because I was told I wouldn't do it, and so I did.
Famous last words, right?
Yeah, famous last words. Like, watch this. And so I don't really enjoy carnival rides, and my wife loves theme parks. Like, grew up as a kid, like traveling to different, like planning family vacations around, like, is there an amusement park that we can go to, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until we were, I think we were engaged, that I went to an amusement park with their family and like rode my first like actual roller coaster, not just like, the ride at the fair that goes in a circle. And because I hated those growing up. I stopped riding rides when I was like 11 because I was like, why do I just want to be dizzy? Like, this makes no sense.
I don't do spinny rides.
And so spinny, like, and that's like all the, small county fairs, like they're all the little spinny rides. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I'm done with this. But I do enjoy roller coasters now, but it has to be cold. I love going like when it's chilly because I don't want to be hot while I'm riding a ride. Because like if I get hot and I get dizzy, I'm done. So we went to like Dollywood like in January. So this is too much. We're bantering. But Drew, all right. So thrill seeking. You talked about crazy faith. Give us your sermon in 60 seconds.
Yeah, I think sermon's pretty simple. We want to be a church that has crazy faith, and that really takes two ingredients that Hebrews 11 teaches us. The first one is a heavenly perspective, like getting our eyes off of things that are in front of us. And get our eyes on things that are in store for us, what God has prepared, that we're foreigners and aliens in this world. So keep our eyes on the ultimate prize. And then second, just an everyday faith. I think one of the most powerful questions I ask is, why would God ask something big from you if he can't get something small from you? And so just having a faith that every day obeys God. And so we want to get to the place where no matter what he asks us, the answer is yes.
That's awesome. And so let's start with like, I feel like in the church world, or even just like if somebody's listening to this podcast, came on Sunday that was more skeptical in nature by the word faith, that there may be even a little, just like keep us at arm's distance when we talk about we're people of faith. what actually is faith? Or a better question is, what is faith actually not? And so in Hebrews, you kind of rooted this whole sermon in Hebrews chapter 11. In Hebrews 11:1, it kind of gives us a good definition of what faith is, and that I think would be a helpful starting point. It says, now faith is confidence in what is hoped for and assurance about what we do not see. So that's what faith is. So what is faith not? What are some common misconceptions about faith?
Yeah, faith is blind, right? You know, we even talked about this at pre-preach. I think sometimes faith can be blind, but it's not always blind. So we're not just running around, you know, worshiping a God that is always blind to us. No, we can sense his presence. We can feel his spirit, right? There are evidence that gives us confidence and assurance that God actually exists, right? So faith is not blind. I also think like there's this weird dichotomy of faith of like sometimes faith is ordinary and sometimes faith is like ridiculous, miraculous.
You could have used extraordinary.
I mean,
ordinary and extraordinary.
Seminary. I try to like rid those things out of me. But like, what's weird about faith is those dichotomies. Because even with blindness, right? Sometimes faith has to be blind. Like God calls it Abram, right? Go to a land that I'm not showing you. That's pretty blind. But it wasn't blind, and he, you know, trusting in God, right? He had the faith in God. So I just think there is some blindness to it, but also some sight in it. And then same with, you know, sometimes he's going to call you, very rarely, I would say, actually, he's going to call you to big and miraculous. Most of it's going to be mundane and monotonous. That's more faith that we experience, but we have to be ready for the miraculous. I'm trying to think of other things faith is not.
I think that's right. You kind of hit all those things in those categories of, you know, faith being blind. A lot of the times like, oh, we walk by faith, not by sight. That verse that Paul says in 1 Corinthians, it's like, oh, this is what, or maybe it's 2 Corinthians, somewhere in Corinthians. But, you know, we walk by faith. Paul said it, right? Not by sight. And people take that to be like, oh, you just got to go and live and just trust. But, you know, I think I've said this before and others have said it, but in front of me of faith is not like walking out on a limb or the ledge and then turning around, sawing off the limb, be like, all right, God, I trust you. Like it's
that's
not
stupidity.
That's stupidity in that regard of doing these things. And it's also, you know, thinking about Hebrews 11:1, it's where is the location of our faith? You know, thinking about Jesus with the faith of the mustard seed, you know, he says, if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you could say this mountain jump and it would jump into the sea and move. It would move. And
I also think on faith, right? What's interesting about people who are like, all Christians have blind faith, but realistically, we all do. And take like spirituality, we have faith blind all the time. Getting on a roller coaster, it requires faith. I tried to like make that point and that assumption that most of the things that we do, whether it's little or big faith, you got to have some pretty big faith.
It's the confidence, right? What is the confidence in? And I think a lot of times we're having confidence in who God is and what he has done, right? Those are the two things, his track record. And we're taking that same principle and looking at that roller coaster and saying like, oh, I can see this roller coaster. And I can see that the 10 rides in front of me while I was standing in line, they worked.
No one has died on it.
Nobody's died yet, but you're still having faith that it will work this time. Right? And so we look at our normal lives of what God is calling us to do and the obedience that he's asking of us. We're like, okay, I know who God is and I know what he has done, but you can't see the future. You're just trusting that God will be the same in the future that he has been in the past. That's what faith really is. It's not this like, oh, just close my eyes, I hope I get there while you're driving, Jesus take the wheel kind of style. It's like, you know, you're trusting in what God has done and who he is and saying, okay, as God carries me into the future, he will remain to be who he has been.
The same thing you do in a marriage. Right?
Exactly.
When you say your vows, I trust who I've known you to be, and I'm believing in who you're going to be. That's why I'm here committing my life to you.
Yeah, exactly. And so what are things that will build into our faith that will encourage us to not be doubters when it seems like, okay, God's asking us to take a next step, or, you know, in community groups, you know, we have growth goals of, okay, I need to double down on this area that I'm lacking in. You know, last weekend you gave us, you know, those 6 processes of sanctification of everything from attending to giving to growing, all these different categories of obedience that we need to grow in. Okay, none of us are perfect in all those categories, but okay, we want to grow. What will help us grow into those things so we can, okay, now I need to do this.
I think in anything to have faith, you have to have a foundation, right? And that's, spending time in God's word, feeding your faith. It's all about a relationship. That's where faith is built. And so early on in your relationship with God, your faith probably won't be that big because there's very little of a track record. And so building your relationship with God through, one, reading his word, understanding what he has done over the history of his people, how he's come through for you, building that foundation through prayer and his word, and then experiences, right? When he asks you to do something and you say yes. So having faith in the small things is what leads to the big things. And so just saying yes to God, see how he provides, see how you can trust him. Those things, those small yeses of faith continue to build faith, right? Faith leads to faith. Small faith leads to greater faith. And so I think, honestly, anything in that process can lead to greater faith. Showing up on Sunday, we're teaching on faith today. So you're going to learn, it's going to build your foundation. It's going to help you trust God, right? Going to group, talking and hearing stories of people who had faith and listening to them inspires faith in you. You think about feeding your faith, right? Again, similar to Sunday, right? We're reading God's word, we're building our faith, sharing your faith, right? All those things, living generously, right? Oh man, I'm not sure I can do this, but watching God provide for me while I do what he says me to do. All these things build faith, build trust, build a relationship. They create confidence and assurance. Well, my confidence is God came through last time. He'll probably come through again. My assurance is he's came through the last 5 times. I'm assured he's going to.
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
assured a word? Is that, am
assured?
I saying that right?
Assurance, assured. Those are both.
I'm assured.
Yeah, I'm assured.
Okay.
It doesn't sound like it.
It sounds wrong. And I said it in my message and I was like, I wonder if that's a word. I probably should check
some
before I said
translations
it.
say that faith is the assurance,
Yes.
is that kind of thing. And so, I love that because you pointed out there's 2 categories of things that build into our faith, like what we do privately and what we do corporately, kind of in a large, we need those private disciplines of I need a relationship with Jesus. Like me individually, I need to build into my relationship with Jesus. I need to be in God's word. I need to pray. I need to talk to God. I need to listen, and I need to be faithful for where God has called me to today. But also, I need other people in to bolster my faith of both going and being the hands and feet of Jesus, loving people in the community, sharing my faith in those regards, but also in the Sunday morning context or in the community group context. And I think one of the things that has built into my faith over the past couple of years is having people in community group that are in my same stage of faith, no matter if they're the same age as me or not.
Right.
But then also having people behind me and ahead of me, where I can see where they're growing, and that encourages my faith to see someone else growing. It shouldn't be this competition, oh dang, they're growing, they're catching up to my it's encouraging to see people take those steps of faith, and then also to see man, I wish I had their faith. I want to be where they're at. So you have all these people in relationship with you, and sharing your faith always challenges your faith in a good way, hopefully, where it's they had good questions that I haven't thought about before. Let me go dig into those things and help me grow.
I call those pulling and pushing relationships, right?
Yeah.
Your faith should be pulling somebody else's faith, and somebody else's faith should be pulling or pushing your faith.
Yeah.
And I think of one important thing when you talk about faith is your faith journey begins with people, right? You think about Moses' story, it started with his parents' example, but at some point in your life, your faith cannot be solely dependent on somebody else's, right? You have to transition from mom and dad's faith, grandma and grandpa's, my community group's faith to my faith, right? I'm trying to teach my kids that right now. Is hey, don't believe this because mommy and daddy believe this. This has to be your faith, your roots. And so making that transition, I think, is really important, where there's a defining moment where, man, this is mine, right? Even if somebody else told me no, this is my faith and my journey and my walk with God. And I think that's important for people to...
I was a junior high pastor for 3 years in Arkansas, and I always gave the illustration of packing and unpacking your suitcase, right? And so the whole time your kids are growing up, right? If they ever have to go anywhere, even on your vacation, maybe they don't do overnights without you, but you're going on family vacay, right? Who's packing their bags? It's like mom and dad. They're packing the bags. We pack our bags for our boys, like any weekend getaways or family vacations. Like we're packing their bags, and like you as the parent have responsible with partnership with the church of packing their theological and spiritual faith suitcase. But there comes a time where they have to start packing their own bags, and they're going to look at their suitcase and they're gonna unpack it. And their junior high and senior high years are usually them unpacking their suitcase and like looking at it, wrestling, like, is this going to end up back in my bag? And you got to be okay as a parent of helping them, walk alongside them as they learn to unpack and repack their suitcase with what they like desire in that. And you're praying like, I packed that suitcase well enough that they're going to look at that thing and they're like, yep, I want this in my suitcase.
And parents, you got to allow them the freedom for their faith to fail, right? Yeah. Oh, you can't always jump in and say, hey, you forgot your underwear. Sometimes they got to go commando because their faith failed. I know that's a terrible illustration, but like, I think parents are so quick to jump in, but some of the greatest lessons are faith failures. Yeah. Right. I put it on the line and it didn't go well, but you pick yourself up and you continue in that journey. Yeah. I'm wondering though, Daniel, is it bad that my wife sometimes packs my suitcase? Like, I don't. That's
another conversation for another day. Yeah, but you think about the illustration that Jesus gave in the scriptures of the prodigal son, right? Mm-hmm. Think about the dad. Like, the dad spent his whole life just trying to give the son everything he wanted, and it wasn't enough for him. And he's like, he had to, the humility of the father to say, okay, you can go, you can test it out on your own. But he was there, and he wasn't like, see, I told you. Like, at least we don't have that in scripture. Like, that's what the father did, but he accepted him back in and helped him, like, but this is what, true living, true walking with Jesus looks like is when you come back home and you realize these things. And so, let's talk about the people of, we talked about wrong views of faith, how we can build our faith. What are a few things really quickly that could damage someone's faith? Like, they were headed down the right track, but we've all had these in just pastoral like ministry of people who have been tainted by things, and they were pursuing Jesus. At least they gave all the outward signs of pursuing Jesus, but they have this scar or whatever. Yeah. What are some things that scar us spiritually? If you want to say,
I think probably the greatest ruiner of faith is your expectations of God. I think when you step out in faith, but that faith has God, I expect you to work in this bubble. And if you don't go in that bubble, it often shatters people's faith, right? Faith is trusting God. It's confidence that God's going to do what he does. And it's assurance that what he does is going to be best. And what often happens with people's faith is they think they're stepping out in faith, but their faith is really in them and their expectations of how God works and how he should work. And when that expectation is shattered, it really crushes people's so-called faith. So I think we have to remember, when we actually do step in faith, make sure that faith, again, is in the right thing. It's not in your expectations of like, God, I know how this should play out, so just trust in my expectation. So
how, I want to jump in right there. How do you balance that with like, there seems like to be like an unhealthy view in some Christian circles, probably even our Christian circle, of always praying, but God, your will be done. Like, being afraid almost to ask for things, thinking about the sermon from the summer and the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, ask, seek, knock, and it will be given to you, right? Yeah. And of like, where's the balance between of us not trying to put God in a bubble with what we actually desire and not actually asking for what we desire? Like, where's the balance in all those things of like, you have some Christians that I'm guilty of this more often than not. Like, God, just your will be done. Like, it's just like, God, you do you're better at doing this than I am. So like, just your will be done and I'll be happy with it. Like, versus, and never asking God for like, come through in this way. Like, come through in this way. Yeah. Like, where's the balance in those things?
I think the balance is, I think you should tell God what you want, right? I don't think he's afraid of your expectations. Yeah. So I think we should pray specific prayers. Like, God, I want my daughter to be a worship leader, right? Or whatever, like, I think tell God what you want, but trust him to do what he needs to do, right? That balance is, God, here I'm laying it on the table. Here's what I want. Yeah. But if you don't give it to me, I trust what you do give to me. And so don't be afraid to to basically be specific with God. I actually think he longs for that.
Yeah.
Right. And I think a lot of times God wants our desires, but there are times, right? Like I pray a lot of prayers that God gives me exactly what I wanted.
Yeah.
But then there are times where I'm praying something specific and God's like, hey, I got something better.
Yeah.
It might not look better. It might not always, sometimes it does look better. I'm like, why didn't I have a big enough faith to ask for that? But sometimes it's like, oh God, that's not what I wanted.
Yeah. And there's this balance of that heavenly perspective that you talked about in this message too, of like aligning our desires with the desires of God, like aligning our hearts together with it's not, because some of this could sound like making God Santa Claus, right? Like I'm making this hit list, like this is what I want for Christmas, God, and I need you to pull through. So just ask in faith, be bold, and when you don't get it, those unhealthy circles of like health, wealth, prosperity gospel, of like you didn't get this because you don't have enough faith,
right?
And that's not at all what we're saying. We're saying it's like you need to be bold enough to really ask, because God knows anyways,
right? He does,
and He's just sitting there like, you're really not. I know what
you're
you
not
actually
tell
want.
me
Like,
that.
you're really not going to say that. And so it's like you being bold of like Jesus says, ask, seek, knock, and it will be given unto you. Those who all that list in Matthew. But then there's also this balance of like I'm trusting the heart of God.
Yeah.
What are other things that potentially could damage someone's faith?
So expectations, I think would be one. I just think. When your faith fails, right? When you step out in faith and you feel like it didn't, again, this comes back to expectations. I think expectations covers a lot of things, but like faith that fails, where you take a giant leap. Okay, let me give you an example, right? I've talked to many people. We've done a couple of capital campaigns around our church, right? If you don't know what that is we just sacrifice to give to something over and above our regular giving. And I remember our last capital campaign, there was a gentleman who was like, man, I sacrificed big time and I expected God to like reward me for it. And my life just seemed to get worse. Like bills came in I wasn't expecting. And it was kind of like, it was my faith a failure.
Wow.
And I think, again, understanding that when you truly do step out in faith, it cannot fail you. Right? The results might not be what you want, but that doesn't mean your faith was a failure. It doesn't mean you didn't have enough faith, so God is punishing you for your lack of faith.
Yeah.
Right? And so I just think, again, the results of faith are not up to you, but faith is.
Yeah.
So stepping out in faith and trusting whatever happens is going to help grow your faith.
Yeah. And it's important to have, I think one of the other things you talked about expectations, but when our faith is actually in the wrong thing, that's something that could really damage our faith. Like when we put all of our faith in a human, in a leader, like I'm coming to church and I come because like, Drew's is so good, like, or whoever, like fill in the blank. It's like, man, people are going to let us down. And so we got to make sure that what our faith is actually rooted in is in God, is in Jesus and what he has done and what he can do and will continue to do. So our last question, just one thought for the person who has maybe some damaged faith. Their faith has failed, that God hasn't met their expectation. They put it in the wrong thing. Like, what's one thing that you want to leave them with to think of, like, of that rebuilding of their faith, of like getting it in the right thing again? Like, what's one thing they can do? What can they do next if they feel like, man, I feel scarred in my faith and I need to heal?
I would say grow your relationship with God. I would say spend time in his word. Understand. I think part of faith and having strong faith is understanding who God is and how he works. Because I think when you have that foundation, the ups and downs of what we would call our faith aren't easily shaken. I think a lot of times people's faith is shaken is because their immaturity or their lack of knowledge in who God is and how he works.
Yeah.
And I think faith for many people is easily shaken because our faith is shattered because God didn't work the way we thought he should, or God didn't come through the way we thought. And it's like, no, he did actually. You're just lacking this foundation that is rooted. And like when the winds blow of whatever, you're not shaken. So I would say if your faith is damaged, like, grow your relationship with Christ, right? Build that rock solid foundation that no matter where your faith leads you and no matter how God responds, you don't blow over easily.
Yeah, I would just say to the person of the verse that came to my mind was that Exodus 14, just be still and know that I'm God. Like
It's also Psalms too, just so you know.
In Psalm it's quoted there. So, but like just that be still moment of like, I constantly in my life when I find, seasons of just doubt or just like dryness, if you want to say that, of just like my prayer, I constantly pray like, God, give me eyes to see where you're working, because I know you're working.
Yeah.
I just lack the eyes to see how you're moving and you're orchestrating, in my life and around me in the community that I'm a part of. Like, just give me eyes to see. Like, I need to probably just slow down and just open my eyes.
Yeah,
Like just
good.
be still and just know that you are working, that you're engaged in our world, you're active in my life and in others. Like, just show me where you're working. And so that can encourage someone's faith. And so, well, thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of A Little Better. We can't wait to hang out with you again next week.